biggest topic of discussion for 49ers fans is Jimmy Garoppolo is still on the team, Rohan, is still on the
Yeah.
team. So a lot of people thought by 1 o'clock Eastern time that Jimmy either had to be cut or traded for the 49ers to really be a player in free agency. And as of now, they went the route to restructure deals and extend to get underneath the cap versus trading Jimmy Garoppolo. And it is kind of interesting because last week we did the whole cap breakdown show, and you pretty much hit on almost every single person, including George Kittle, who you mentioned was a possibility, even though you weren't a fan of that move, but they ended up doing that as well. The only one that they still haven't done, which I'm assuming they will do, is Jimmy Ward. They still haven't done that. But Jimmy Garoppolo is still on the team. His $25 million is still on the books. And a lot of people are freaking out about that. And I saw today in Twitter, you were saying that you weren't too worried about that, Rohan. So I wanted to get your take. Are people overreacting to the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo still isn't traded?
Yeah, in a way. And I'll say this, I was part of the majority thinking that Jimmy Garoppolo was not going to be on this roster on March 16th. March 16th, of course, being today, the start of the league year. I tweeted out that, this was a little bit in the heat of the moment, but I did tweet out a week ago that I said there was a 100% chance that Jimmy Garoppolo was not going to be rostered on March 16th. And guess what? The 49ers proved me wrong. And I think it's really just been how the market has developed over the last week. When we look at the market, we've seen how the 49ers have responded. They know that Jimmy Garoppolo is kind of on the back burner in terms of the next quarterback being moved because Deshaun Watson has now jumped into the realm. Obviously, we did the show last Wednesday, I believe,
Yeah.
and on Friday, Deshaun Watson was cleared of all charges, putting Jimmy Garoppolo back at second fiddle kind of in the quarterback market. And we've seen the Deshaun Watson scales kind of like escalate over the last week. We've seen him talk to a multitude of teams, and there have been more than expected teams being interested, obviously, in one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. So that has kind of delayed the process with Deshaun Watson taking his time. And the main caveat is the Houston Texans were under the cap the entire time. So they don't really have a deadline as to when to trade Deshaun Watson to clear up that cap space of his $35 million contract. So they're kind of like, they're not really pressed for time while the 49ers might be. And so Deshaun Watson, obviously, I've been kind of saying this week, is the first move that should happen. And we're going to wait for that. But some new news came, and that is Baker Mayfield likely being moved from the Cleveland Browns. So are people overreacting? Not necessarily. I do think the 49ers have kind of stuck to their plan in that they haven't really been hindered from signing free agents. They did sign a guy who we'll talk about a little later, but the 49ers have stuck to their plan. They did the restructures that I expected, although I wasn't a fan of one of them. They did the restructures to get under the cap, and they now can hold Jimmy Garoppolo's contract and stay under the cap, although they haven't officially signed Travarius Ward and Oren Burks, 2 guys that they picked up. So I'm not overreacting to it yet because I do still believe there's a market for Garoppolo, and I do think that he still gets moved once Deshaun Watson falls.
So let me play devil's advocate, Rohan, to the fans. I'll be the voice of the fans that are like, no, Rohan, the $25 million needs to get off the books. We just saw Von Miller go sign a huge contract with the Bills. We just saw Chandler Jones. Dude, that one broke my heart, bro. Chandler Jones is dead to me. But Chandler Jones just still go sign a deal with the Raiders. Hassan Reddick, gone. That was somebody that you were pretty high on. When you were talking about free agents for the 49ers to bring in. All of these guys that we were kind of eyeing to be potential players for the 49ers are now gone. And the reason why the 49ers can't really be a player for them is that they have an extra $25 million hanging over their cap like a rain cloud with this Jimmy G contract. So at what point does it become where now you're missing out on opportunities to make your team better because you're not pulling the trigger with this Jimmy G trade?
Yeah, it is definitely fair. I said this earlier today, and I'm part of the group where we shouldn't overreact, but I did say this earlier today, and that is, does the Jimmy Garoppolo trade somewhat hinder the 49ers in free agency? Because the 49ers now, if they're making a move in free agency and don't really have a destination for Garoppolo yet, especially with the like, I'm not saying it's a high potential, but there is probably like a 20% chance he gets cut. they have to account for that 7.5 million in contract negotiations. And with Garoppolo not on the roster and free agents wanting to make sure that their deals go through, they're going to probably have to they're evaluating restructures and other moves apart from a Garoppolo trade to accommodate new free agents, which likely hinders their process and kind of puts them on the back burner. So while they may be interested, they might not be the front runners for certain free agents. And we saw players like Chandler Jones get $17.5 million. Could the 49ers have accommodated that with Garoppolo deal? Yes. But one thing I did say is the 49ers were not going to look to overspend at any position in free agency, especially at edge and especially especially at edge, first of all, and especially at offensive line. We saw that the 49ers did not go for Laken Tomlinson. We'll get to that in a minute. But speaking specifically on edge with these guys like Chandler Jones and these guys like Hassan Reddick, I said that Chandler Jones, the maximum that he could be paid for the 49ers to be interested was around that $13 to $15 million range, with $15 million being the peak per season. He got a 3-year deal too. And a 3-year deal at his age. I think he's going into his age 32 season. That is a little bit worrisome going into his age 32 season for that long of a contract at that much money. So I did think that it was still past the 49ers price range. So even if they had the money, I wouldn't expect them to have signed Chandler Jones, especially Von Miller after he got that huge deal from the Buffalo Bills. So I'm not necessarily worried that the 49ers didn't go out and get those guys, just because I thought they were unrealistic, first of all, given that Chandler Jones was expected to make 15 to 18 on the market. And that's what my prediction was. And that's what he ended up getting. So yeah, I don't necessarily think that Jimmy has hindered them from getting those guys, but it certainly is something to think about in negotiations.
So another, like, playing devil's advocate as far as this Jimmy G trade is, right, there was reports that came out that a team had offered the 49ers a second-round draft pick. There has been, there's been rumors that, they've gotten, multiple picks from the Commanders and the Steelers at one point, maybe not like second and third round picks, but like maybe multiple fourths or some conditional picks. And the 49ers, if these reports are to be believed, have passed on all of these. So that's another thing where some people are like, are the 49ers messing this up by waiting so long to trade Jimmy, or when they had a second round pick, or when they had, multiple draft picks from teams that were, pretty much for sure looking for a veteran quarterback, like the Commanders, like the Steelers, who have now gone, different routes. Is this just a miscalculation by the team?
Now, the second round pick rumors, now obviously it looks like a little bit of a wow. If they got a second round pick and didn't take it and now they're in this position, it may seem a little weird, especially if they don't get that second rounder in return. I still do think a second rounder is a possibility in a Garoppolo trade, just given who ends up with him and how a market develops. I think there's a possibility. But if they had a second rounder prior to free agency, I think that they would have taken it now looking in hindsight, because not only is the Garoppolo move harming their free agency status, it's also just harming the locker room. This is toxic culture, right? With reports flying everywhere about Garoppolo potentially staying with the team, about the team having to do so much just to keep Garoppolo on the roster when they've made it so clear that they were going to trade him, that the 49ers may be overthinking it. And I know one of the guys that I respect very well in this industry is Benjamin Albright, a reporter for the Denver Broncos. He says he thinks the 49ers overplayed their hand. And I mean, it's not the first time that we've seen them do it. The 49ers, they think methodically, but they do think that they're kind of had the upper hand a lot. We saw that last year when they tried to trade for Matthew Stafford. Kyle Shanahan thought he had it in the bag, then let it slip the last night when Matthew Stafford ended up going to the Los Angeles Rams because Sean McVay swooped in. So that's definitely something to think. The 49ers, they try and be methodical, but they also try and scrounge for as much value as possible. So when you look at it, I think, just culture-wise, I would have probably traded him for that second-round pick now, looking in hindsight. But they do try and get as much value as possible.
For sure. And I mean, I'm kind of in between on this, which obviously isn't great because, pick a side, Sunil. But I do believe that them restructuring these deals and not just cutting Jimmy was the right move to make in the situation that we have right now. You kind of mentioned it, and we're about to get in that topic. But one of the biggest leverage or lack of leverage that they had was everybody thought they had to get rid of Jimmy to be able to have cap space to play around in free agency. But the fact that they restructured these deals, got underneath the cap with still allowing Jimmy to be there, now those other teams can't use that as a way to lowball the 49ers. Now, whether or not they still have a deal, I still think there's a path to where Jimmy Garoppolo can still be valued at, a third or second round pick, or like some conditional picks that could turn into a second or a first. But there's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of dominoes that have to fall. And the main domino, let's segue into that, is obviously the quarterback you mentioned earlier, and that's Deshaun Watson.